Okay, we're good to go?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I first want to start by thanking the Naval Association of Canada for inviting me. They had asked if I could speak at the Battle of the Atlantic Gala, and then with COVID hitting, that got preempted, obviously. So this would be the sort of the makeup version of being able to present and talk with you. Very humbled. I see some really distinguished names in the audience, and it's a real privilege for me to be here virtually this evening. And I congratulate everyone for maintaining their health and their sanity in these pretty unprecedented times. If we go to the next slide, Ray pretty much hit all the boring highlights of my career. This just, I think, tries to establish some legitimacy. But I was always told to start presentations on a bit of a high note, and I get to speak a lot at a lot of conferences through the job. And I was recently in Estonia at a conference on Russia, and we had Russian senior officers there and some academics. And they challenged some of the concepts that we had presented. And they, in fact, made the acclamation that Vladimir Putin is probably the world's greatest peacekeeper. And when we asked how could they validate that, they said, well, he takes a piece of your land and he keeps it. So that's his claim to fame. So we'll move on to the next slide. Hopefully that humor breaks the ice. And if you didn't find it funny, then I'll apologize in advance. So looking at NATO, and if you're like me and weren't aware really what a center of excellence was, I had no idea what it was till I was posted there. I hadn't heard of them. I hadn't understood how they operated. So it was a learning experience for me a couple of years ago. I'm in my third year down here in Norfolk, and it's been a pretty enjoyable program so far. So we're a multinational entity. We offer support to NATO and a lot of transformational objectives, but we also do some direct support and operational side house as well. We're actually not part of the NATO command structure, even though we wear the NATO crest on our name tags and on our ensemble. But we're a support element. We're a memorandum of understanding organization. All of our work is steered by a program of work. We have 13 contributing nations. Canada is obviously one of them. And what we do is we set up this program of work annually, presented to a steering committee of senior officers from the contributing nations, and they approve it. And that gives us basically our license to spend the money. Very, very modest budget. It's only $275,000 annually US, and that really is a lot for travel and upkeep of our IT and office spaces, which are hosted by the United States Navy. So we belong to, as a part of the 13 nations, the COE belongs to those sponsoring nations. We're funded by the sponsoring nations. There's a small seat fee that Canada pays, pretty modest. I think it's only about $8,500 annually, and that just covers some of the operating expenses. And then the framework nation for us, the United States, pays for most of the fixed costs or the sunken costs of IT and our office, and the background IT and our office support and PPE and whatnot. We're directed by a steering committee, so it's much like NATO in that there is a all or nothing vote. So it's complete consensus that drives our program of work. And our COE director is Vice Admiral Woody Lewis. He's a triple-hatted US 3-star. He's also commanding 2nd Fleet, and he commands Joint Force Command Norfolk, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So he's responsible to the steering committee to make sure that we stay on track and we do what we've been approved to do. Next slide, please. So we have some actually very interesting roots. Our roots can be traced right back to the start, really, of the Cold War. Going into the 50s, we were striking Fleet Atlantic originally. We did a real focus on supporting the development of NATO's maritime strategy. We really had a focus on sea control, power projection, and oceanic reinforcement around the rim of Europe. So getting the supplies back and forth and keeping the battle going if it were to happen. We deactivated Striking Fleet Atlantic at the end of the Cold War, sort of the peace dividend, if you would. And there was a real push to draw down on the NATO command structure, how many people were assigned to it and the costs assigned to it. Some of you might have been associated with that era during your tenure if you were in uniform. So we draw from there, and NATO was a little bit sneaky, and maybe forward-looking could be made as an argument as well, in that they took the bodies that were in there, they removed them from the official accounting of the NATO command structure, and they stood up these centers of excellence. So they kept the NATO uniforms centrally located, various locations, but they also didn't lose the expertise, and they have the forces available, but they didn't count against it in the accounting terms. So it was a politically palatable solution. So they stood up the combined and joint operations from the Sea Center of Excellence at 2nd Fleet. It's a bit of an unwieldy title. It's a bit awkward, but it comes from the missions and the taskings and function statement of 2nd Fleet at the time and of Striking Fleet Atlantic. So they didn't really hide what they were doing. They just established the Center of Excellence. Next slide, please. So we're one of 26 accredited centers of excellence, and we're the only one that's outside of Europe. And that really offers us a really good advantage because we're located about 500 meters from Allied Command Transformation, which is one of the strategic commands. We have the operational command in Belgium, and we have transformational command here in Norfolk. As I said, we're a MOU organization established 2006. We're hosted by Commander 2nd Fleet, so we fall under him for command and control. We're pretty small. We're supposed to be 25. Right now we're 20. We've had some nations have pulled out. We're going through what's called NATO command structure adaptation, where we're really reoperationalizing NATO and the command. This has fallen out of 2014, the illegal annexation of Crimea by the Russians, which kind of woke NATO up back into a very operational mindset. So some of the countries are having a look. They've pulled out from the COE temporarily while they readjust their PYs, and they're going to be probably putting more people back into the Center of Excellence, but they want to man up the newly stood up NATO headquarters first. We also have a United States Navy Reserve that does a lot of background support to us as well. We're funded, as I said, through the 13 nations. You can see the nations there. It's a really good spread. It has its ups and downs working within a NATO alliance, but the cons definitely the pros, said that backwards. The pros definitely outweigh the cons. The strength of the alliance is pretty strong, despite some of the frustrations every now and then. Next slide, please. So we have a pretty generic mission statement, vision statement. Every organization sort of needs these to be put up to remind people of what their job is. We support the sponsoring nations in NATO. We improve their ability to conduct operations to counter emerging security challenges. It's really changed since I've actually been there. I've been very fortunate. I understood in the early 2000s, it was very security mission focused. It wasn't really a threat. And since I've been there, obviously the focus has been on countering and deterring Russian aggression in Europe. That's been building continuously. Next slide, please. So what we do, I'll get through this and then I'll talk a little bit more about Canada specific stuff. We provide a maritime focus for the Alliance for warfighting development. We act as a transatlantic bridge, which is pretty important. We kind of work both ways. We sort of keep the Americans in check from just being all about America and they forget about NATO. There's often a lot of talk about America or the US Navy and NATO, and we remind them that it's the US Navy in NATO. So we're the bridge, transatlantic bridge, to sort of translate between NATO language and American language. In a perfect world, we wouldn't need that, but probably everyone understands the requirement. We drive maritime interoperability and integration, so every time our admiral gets a chance to talk, the US admiral, talking to his fleet in Second Fleet, he is driving home the requirement to be interoperable with NATO. And actually, it's really exciting to hear the vernacular change within US leadership, because at the senior levels at H1, H0, they are talking about not only interoperability, but getting well past that. They're talking about integration and now interchangeability. And you're starting to see that. We have US Marine F-35s operating on the British carrier. We're now talking about British and French joining carrier strike groups as carriers. So it's really an exciting period to be there. We align to the 4 pillars of the NATO Center of Excellence program. I think you can see it there. I'll go through them really briefly, but so we are maintained in our accreditation by NATO. We have rules that we have to follow and standards that we keep. They're checked through an audit process every 3 to 5 years by ACT, Allied Command Transformation, and we usually fare extremely well. It's not a challenge for us. Next slide.
Coming right up.
So one of the pillars is concept development. Actually, before I get into it, I'll take a step back and explain our organization a little bit. We have 2 main branches. One is called warfare analysis, and I'm the branch head for that. And our second is doctrine development. And the original memorandum of understanding that was signed back in 2006 really only gave the mandate to the Center of Excellence to go through and verify the US Navy's doctrine and make sure that it was in line and it wasn't radically different from NATO doctrine, and vice versa. So they tried to keep a continuity between doctrine. We've progressed pretty significantly past that. So my branch, I think I might be completely biased because I've got a really great team that works for me, and we have more of the fun, I think, side. Not that doctrine is not important, but I think we get to sort of play into the future and guess and look at these systems that are coming online or weapons that are coming online and try to guess how the impact of those will be on the future fight. And we really talk about at work sort of the fight tonight and the fight tomorrow. And my branch really looks at the fight tomorrow. So we're a bit of fortune tellers, and I guess truth be told, it's an easier job than the doctrine development. No one's going to be around to check our homework. We'll be long gone, but we write these really good papers predicting everything and make it sound like we're really good fortune tellers. So right now, conceptually, we're looking, as I mentioned, the European Carrier Strike Group concept. The Maritime Unmanned Systems is a up-and-coming field of study. Excuse me. There's a very well-known lack within NATO right now. It's well understood within operational leadership on anti-submarine warfare. Canada's really been, at the forefront of it. When I was the chief of staff, the DCOM for the Standing NATO Maritime Group, we get to regularly meet with a lot of very senior folks within NATO, both civilian and military side. And I had the privilege of really receiving a lot of accolades on behalf of the Canadian ships, the Canadian submarine, on the work that they've been doing and the effort that we put in for anti-submarine warfare. So it's very well recognized. We're looking at building a NATO amphibious force, sort of trying to pair what they're doing in the United States with the Marines, who are getting back to being more of a blue water asset vice fighting battles off in the desert. So that's very much up and coming and on the eyes of senior leadership within NATO. NWCC is the NATO Warfighting Capstone concept. This is the future development of where NATO should be going. There's two basic pushes. If I go back to the fight tonight and the fight tomorrow, the NWCC is NATO ACT's broad campaign into the future and where we have to go and how command and control will change and how assets, spending, capital development, command establishments, how all that will develop. And then the corollary to that is the fight tonight, and that's DDA, and that's the defense and deterrence of the European environment. And that's really aligning to make sure that what they call joint domain awareness and joint domain capability is being advanced in the fight today. So obviously we're not in a fight with the Russians, and we try to keep the vernacular. We used to be more calling them competitors, vice threat or enemies. But I think it's well known that Russia is really pushing up just below the Article 5 threshold, or the declaration of an Article 5. And they're doing a lot of things in hybrid space with cyber and with information warfare. And DDA is really trying to capture that and how we win in that space. So it's pretty exciting to contribute to that as well. Next slide, please. So analysis and lessons learned. This is more of the doctrine development branches side of the house, the lessons learned. We do a bit of the analysis, but it's more theoretical, looking at what is needed and where the gaps are, not so much on doing a forensic on an exercise or an operation. So we're doing a big data analysis, which ironically comes under our branch. This is looking at trying to instill in NATO the need for a big data strategy on how it's going to manage all the data coming in. I was at a meeting the other day where one of the American information warfare analysis and the analyst was talking, and they were saying that as we are situated now, we have basically the equivalent of the US Library of Congress coming in every half day into the Navy, and that's how much data needs to be analyzed and categorized and then acted upon, and they don't really have a great strategy for how we're doing it. Canada has a very decent data strategy, and we're actually pulling a lot from the Canadian big data strategy into trying to shape NATO and the US's big data strategy. Maritime cyber threat analysis is also our branch. That's looking at, we started off with just the generic maritime environment on ships, how the cyber threat can be developed. We progressed through development of cyber threats for warships specifically, and now we're looking at cyber threat on command and control of maritime unmanned systems and how drones and the unmanned systems, water and underwater, can be protected. We do design for NATO exercises and look at post-exercise analysis and the mission functions and tasking analysis. That's really a support to JFC Norfolk. They're a pretty nascent command that just stood up within the last year, and we've been helping them get on track and use our expertise in the maritime field to get them up and running. Next slide, please. So doctrine development, that's the other branch. They host the annual NATO Maritime Operational Working Group, which is all the working groups throughout NATO come together, and this is sort of their capstone event of the year. There's the NATO Amphibious Ops Working Group, which does the same thing, but for the amphibious field. We've developed an interoperability guide, and we host an interoperability and integration action group with the US. In a perfect world, we wouldn't really need the interoperability guide if Maritime Ops Working Group was optimal and working as planned. But when you have 30 countries with 30 different opinions, sometimes doctrine, tactics, and ideas and concepts sort of stall at the working group level. The interoperability guide was drafted by us, and it's really a how-to for the European nations when they come over to Norfolk and integrate with a cooperative deployment program with the U.S. Carrier Strike Group, how they make all the connections, what has to be thought through, how the meetings, and we kind of translate what the U.S. is talking about into NATO speak and vice versa. And we also set up the Carrier Strike Group commander, the U.S. One Star. We help him with his N5 and his teams in how do they plan, what technical equipment do they need on board to talk with NATO, what could they expect. There's really an education piece to it. We talk a lot with flag officers. They're amazing at their U.S. Job, but sometimes they have some knowledge gaps on NATO, and we try to fill those in. Generally, they're all extremely intelligent. They get it very quickly, and they're a real pleasure to work with. The Integration Action Group is a group that meets, it's mandated by our commander, Admiral Lewis, to get together with the U.S. Carrier Strike Groups and various training groups, and making sure that interoperability is baked in, to use his words, into U.S. training. It's really very difficult sometimes. I don't want to talk disparagingly about the U.S., but they have a very, very rigid and inflexible sort of forced development or forced generation, I suppose, process to go from coming out of the refit or coming out of a new ship plan into being at a high readiness operational deployer. And it doesn't allow for much deviation from these standard checklists. It's a known problem, I would say, as might be a bad word, but U.S. flag officers are frustrated by sort of the mid-level 05, 04, even the 03 officers for their adherence to these checklists, and they don't really include NATO in there. So we try to get in there as much as possible and build NATO awareness into their training program. In fact, for an upcoming U.S. deployer, we built a week-long vignette about NATO and their deployment. And they're actually going to compress it, I think, into 2 or 3 days of the COM2X, but at least it'll get into their training and it'll force the U.S. to start thinking NATO. The U.S. Admiral Lewis that I've mentioned several times, he's also trying to actually break the U.S. mentality of operating completely on what they call SIPRNet, for those who are familiar with it. And he wants to install within his combined Second Fleet JFC Norfolk a completely NATO secret working network that all U.S. will work on primarily and not default to SIPRNet, which is a U.S. eyes only system. So he's got big ambitions. It's hard to change the U.S. bureaucracy a little bit, but I think he's going to get there eventually. Next slide, please. So another pillar for us is education. We don't really do any formal courses. We're not like Oberammergau or some of the Center of Excellences that have a NATO educational function. Ours is more by osmosis. You can see there on the right our Cutting the Bow Wave. That's a magazine that my branch puts out. We're just actually completing the 2021 version. It should be leaving the printer within the next 2 weeks. That occupied a lot of my time over Christmas, and that's taking articles, summarizing some of the projects we're doing. It also reaches out to our network of partners. You can see on the left-hand side of the screen, we have a really, really well-established network. I've been really fortunate to work with some of the best in the business. I've been working with some of the top universities in the nation, some of the top universities over in Europe, and some of the really large think tanks. So we've been really fortunate to be able to tap into that. And some of them have provided articles for us in our magazine. If you're interested in the magazine, feel free to shoot me an email later and I'll make sure you get a copy. We also, if you see in the bottom right corner, we have conferences that we hold annually. Unfortunately, this year it had to be virtual due to COVID. But in Norfolk, it's the Maritime Security Regime Roundtable. This one is a little bit more in tune with our roots. It's a security, unclassified, and it focuses mostly on maritime security. So we get industry, we get academia, we get government, we get military in that conference. And it's really a nice 2-3 days over at the Slover Library in Norfolk, just talking about maritime security. And we have a set up on LinkedIn as well, with I think 100 or so participants exchanging information and situational awareness about maritime security issues. So we have a great network. It's fun to work with them and get out of the office and travel to some of the various countries and participate in their conferences. Next slide. So as I alluded to, we pretty much, our basis is an interoperability mandate. I try to minimize the wording on some of these screens coming up. But our interoperability varies from a single deployer that'll deploy with the US or part of their carrier strike group, and a multilateral or a bilateral, I guess bilateral if it's a single deployer. Or we work setting up large multinational task groups and working with the US to make sure that they understand the requirements for NATO. Baltops, which is taken in the picture there, over in the Baltic, is a great example. Second Fleet used it as a validation exercise for US Second Fleet's IOC, and you know, it was really eye-opening, I think, for a lot of the American commanders and the leadership on what exactly has to go into a NATO exercise. Next slide. So this is our program of work 2020 that we just completed. I'm not going to go through all that, obviously. It's a bit of an alphabet slapped on a page, but I would draw the attention. We have 4 major lines of effort. A 5th line is just continuing activity that we do, and that's the line in yellow. But we found that NATO's leadership had a really, despite owning the COEs and their accreditation program, they had a real challenge in understanding what was coming out of the COEs and how it supported their efforts. So we took the Maritime Operational Commanders Conference, which is all of NATO's senior leadership for their navies. They meet in the UK in Northwood annually, and the 3 and 4 stars talk it out about what has to be done to push the yardsticks for the NATO maritime environment. We took their basically after action report, we turned our lines of effort directly using their language and their priorities, and it's worked very well for us. We can now explain what we're doing. It really resonates well with leadership on how our efforts are supporting their priorities. So we look at Maritime C2 in the joint combined space. That's a real shortfall for those who were around, I think, in the early 2000s when the term maritime blindness was getting coined in Canada. Maritime blindness exists in NATO headquarters. They're very, very focused on land and air, and they don't really have great situational awareness about maritime requirements. So that one's been a very important push for us. We are supporting the development of the amphibious capability, unmanned systems capability, and really trying to understand our competitors. There's obviously a very big push on understanding Russia. Russia is very interesting, but there hasn't been much of a look or a thought into China. And coming from the West Coast before I went to NATO, I was very interested in China. I did my master's thesis on China. And we've been pushing what's China going to do to the dynamic if the U.S. gets in a conflict within that region and leaves a lot of assets that the NATO is counting on, and they move those assets into PACOM, what happens then? So it's very interesting to see that field develop within NATO, and we're actually hearing the fruition of our very humble work is starting to make its way up through the leadership, and we're hearing Jens Stoltenberg actually talking about China now and NATO and competition. So it's nice to see that. Next slide. So this is our 2021 program. What we'll be working on, if anyone's interested, can forward that off to you. Very similar in structure, very similar in design, and the execution will be quite similar. There's some interesting stuff that our guys are delving into. What does a 5G network do for the NATO environment? How's it change in the maritime? Is it going to change much for warships? How are drones coming in the maritime environment, whatnot? And then understanding, again, China, looking at resource scarcity and climate change, and what does that mean exactly in the Arctic, especially where the Russian bastion strategy is predicated on being able to survive in the Arctic, and when the ice is gone, what does that mean for their strategy? So we're looking at a lot of interesting little niche categories, I would say. Next slide. So that was kind of the 101. It's a little bit dull. I apologize in advance for that, but I'll try to put it into context now operationally of how CJOS operates. So we try to say we're the little connective tissue and tendons between the major muscle groups, just making sure that they function correctly. United States Second Fleet is most likely going to be the Maritime Component Commander for the Northern European or the Northern Atlantic region. I've got a slide that I've kind of declassified down to some speaking points, and it should bring this into context a little bit better. But we're really supporting JFC Norfolk, which is the operational level joint commander, and we take it down to the tactical level, Second Fleet, ships going out to sea, and we try to make sure that there's an understanding of process and an understanding of execution on the mission there. And then we liaise with the big NATO organizations to make sure that both Second Fleet and JFC Norfolk are understanding what's coming in from MARCOM, Maritime Command Headquarters in Norfolk, from SHAPE in Belgium, and liaising with the other organizations such as Strike Force NATO or the various JFC, Brunsum and Naples. It was quite important when Second Fleet was first stood up, and when JFC was really just standing up. They didn't have a lot of personnel on the ground, but now we're seeing that they've got their legs under them. The personnel are starting to fill in. So our role will be changing a little bit as they're going to take on more and more. And it's really incredible to watch the knowledge base develop within Second Fleet, within JFC Norfolk. They're really not relying on us as much and taking more on. So frees us up to sort of look longer range. Next slide. So the mission really for that CJOS supports directly is a deterrence mission. JFC Norfolk is charged essentially with 3 mission subsets. So I can only show 2 on this map, but the large arrow there going across to Europe, that's the resupply of Europe into the European theater. JFC Norfolk will be bringing the heavy equipment from the U.S. through Military Sea Lift Command over to what's probably Rotterdam or one of the major ports over in Europe, and acting as that bridge through from North America in the North Atlantic and over to Europe. The other thing it does give as well, having the headquarters in Norfolk, is survivability. So we have redundancy if NATO ever gets itself in a conflict with Russia and Russia targets sort of the headquarters and the various military outposts with long-range weaponry. They still can't hit Norfolk unless they're using submarines that hopefully don't get through. But it's a better redundant position for NATO. And then the very typical GI-UK gap. I think that one's been talked about since probably well before I was born, early into the 50s. So very traditional role there. And then their other mission is power projection and strike into the Arctic and getting up into Murmansk and Northern Fleet. So how we think it would sort of roll out if there was a fourth Battle of the Atlantic, those mission subsets would be executed by JFC Norfolk. JFC Brunsum would handle the land battle in through the Fulda Gap and the traditional neutralizing Kaliningrad and getting through the Baltics. And then we would anticipate JFC Brunsum and 6th Fleet in the Mediterranean. It's a really different dynamic though now. Like I said, China brings an interesting mix into this, and US weaponry. US has gone on to really, they've gotten away from a very large blue water fleet, and they're kind of into a more smaller ships with bigger punch, carrying longer range weaponry. So it's an interesting battle if it were to unfold. But I don't, I can't predict the future, but I don't think it would unfold. Russia's completely overmatched, overnumbered. No real gain for Moscow to get into an Article 5 situation. But they are very comfortable at operating in this gray zone or hybrid zone, and that's really a challenge, I think, for all the nations. Next slide. So what we try to do for Admiral Lewis is not get sucked into the day-to-day micro-tactical, and we try to remain, I put this at 10,000 foot view, but you could probably look up at a 50,000 foot view. I've downgraded this slide. There's no real explanation for the numbers. It's I had to try to keep it obviously unclassified, but really we were trying to look at how Russia is maneuvering much like on a chess board to make sure we're not going to get checkmated in one area. And you know, what we're seeing is the preposition of specific capabilities up in the Arctic, especially with command and control and some long-range weaponry. We're seeing more longer range weaponry placed into Kaliningrad Oblast in the Baltic. When I was with the NATO group, we had a very, very interesting mission of kind of shooing away ships that were hovering right above transatlantic cables. So we know that they're doing some sort of undersea research, or seeing if they can hack into data cables and threatening our information and basically our livelihood that way. And then we saw some really interesting stuff in the Mediterranean, supporting Syria, establishing bases in Tartus, just off the coast of Syria, and kind of violating the Montreux Convention, moving submarines that were supposed to go for maintenance, and they actually had a 6-month or 8-month deployment prior to getting back into a Russian port. So we're really trying to check and watch this for the Admiral to give an appreciation of what's happening from a much higher strategic perception. And for a very busy 3-star who's got a very large fleet within 2nd Fleet, I think he appreciates the analysis quite wholesomely. Next slide, please. So I promised Barry and Ray that I'd talk a little bit about Canadian and NATO in our ASW. As I alluded, we're very well regarded for our ASW. We have a reputation for excellence. We have a legacy reputation. I think we're building a new legacy with our our ships, the frigates, just before they transitioned to Canadian surface combatants. But certainly when I was over as the DCOM for SNMG-1, we had a real embarrassment of riches with ships, and we broke the task group into two subgroups, and the commander of Maritime Command was really stuck with a task of keeping Russian kilos in check over off the coast of Syria. And it was really proud. It was a proud moment as a Canadian to hear the Canadian Navy step up and say, we'll go where others won't. And we split up our ships. We put the Canadians off Syria, and we kept the kilos in check pretty aggressively, and did a great job there, and received a lot of kudos for what they were doing there. And the Canadian tail, the helicopter, and just the talent in our operations room really came through and shone there. And additionally, I think, which is equally important to note, is the support that we received from the RCN and from CJOC, the Joint Operations Command, in making sure that we had the ability to chop our ships down into that area. We had the ability to resupply. Finance really wasn't a challenge. Getting support and equipment in wasn't questioned. It really, really was a Canadian effort to make sure that was a success, and it was outstanding. On the bottom left, this was a kind of, I wouldn't say it was a surprise, but I would say a lot of people didn't know about it. We had HMCS Windsor operating in the Mediterranean, doing some missions that we didn't talk about. They did an amazing job. They stayed on station for a tremendous amount of time. Given some of the challenges that we've had with the Victoria class, this was a really great story for us, and it was really great to see Windsor contributing, and again, at the highest levels, attending the operational briefings and hearing the success and what Windsor was doing in that environment, in that region, was just tremendous. And then we also do extremely well sort of on the exercise side, which is not as sexy as the operational. But the bottom right corner is a dynamic mongoose. It's held off the coast of either Norway or Iceland at the sort of March, April timeframe, I believe, annually. And our ships did amazingly well there. We're very well regarded by the submariners as being a hard ship to hit, a hard ship to fight against. So we have maintained, I think, a reputation for excellence. We had some challenges going through, I would say, the late 90s, early 2000s with Mannings and getting technicians in place for, or operators in place, not technicians. But really, it's coming out in spades now. They've just done a really great job. And like I said, I was often receiving accolades on behalf of the Canadian Navy from NATO's commanders about how impressed they were with Canadian sailors and submarine anti-submarine warfare. I think also I just read on LinkedIn that HMCS Winnipeg coming back from PACOM mission was heralded. I think they called her the ASW Samurai or something to that effect. So it's nice to see that in that region as well. Canada's making a name for itself in ASW. And this is very important. I think if you look at what the Russians are now building, they're very quiet, they're very stealthy, they're very large and carry long-range weaponry. So ASW is a known challenge for NATO, and Canada is going to be looked upon for its leadership going forward. Next slide. Barry and Ray also talked about if there's any opportunities for maybe reservists who had joined. I can't see everybody's cameras, so I don't know if there are any active reservists, but even some of the members that are not in uniform or not in the reserves, we are always looking for manuscripts. We're always looking for articles. It would be great to hear from you. We can publish them through our network and get the word out that way. And I would say for the reservists, there's opportunities at both MARCOM, Maritime Command, especially when there's surges in Russian activity. I know that they're always looking for people for short-term contracts to help out on the watch floor and help out on the analyst side. And there's also a really good NATO shipping center at Marcom that deals with civilian shipping and liaison and controlling and understanding the movement of major civilian transport on the water. So good opportunity there if people are interested. JFC Norfolk, they're always looking for bodies. We can do what's called a voluntary national contribution, a VNC. If there's a reservist, then the funding is available through the Navy that we can man, get you down here to Norfolk and work temporarily or long-term with NATO. It's a really good environment, terrific leadership, and working with the other nations has a lot of really tangible benefits that we've really been happy with personally and professionally. Next slide. I think I'll wrap it there. I apologize for maybe going on a little bit long. I hope I kept everybody's attention. I hope it was interesting for you. Here's my contact information. There's our website, our Twitter site. Unlike President Trump, we haven't been banned from Twitter, so we'll go ahead and send out some tweets, and if you're interested, you can follow us there. And we also have the LinkedIn group for the Maritime Security Regime. You're more than welcome to join, and you can see what we're involved with and what we're going to be doing in the future. And if that works for Barry, I think I'll end it there.
Okay, thank you, Todd. I'm going to stop recording the presentation right now, and we'll move into questions and answers.